Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, he's a returning guest, although I haven't talked to him in a little while. So I'm looking forward to catching up. Someone who is someone who I respect very deeply for what he has accomplished in the world of media and more particularly writing, and what he is still accomplishing. Just released. It's six. It is your sixth book, correct?
Sixth book.
My goodness, how one writes a book, let alone 6 books.
I got the time. Man, I'm an idiot. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself.
the name of the we're already talking. The name of the book is The Time Has Come. And of course, you could read him elsewhere, including he writes for MLB. He has a podcast about movies. You may know him from a little website that was around once upon a time called Deadspin. He also writes for New York Magazine occasionally, and he did so recently, in which he penned an article about our beloved Knickerbockers. And he has a newsletter on Substack. How can I forget that? The one and only Will Leitch. How are you, man?
Hi, thanks for having me. And thank you. I was telling you before we came on, I'm my editor, Matt Myers at MLB, and I are both obsessive Knicks fans, obsessed with the newsletter. We have bi-weekly meetings, and the first half of every meeting is, can you believe Macri said this? What the hell is he talking about? Okay, that was a good point. Like, it's amazing how what percent of our conversation is about the stuff that you write. So keep that in mind. It is a sacred and profound responsibility. So please keep that. At all times.
That sacred and profound responsibility is my form of therapy that I have somehow spun into making a living.
That is the goal. That to me, people always say you know what? Make your job the thing that you love to do. No, make your job your therapy. Like that is actually the goal for everyone. So
it's cheaper.
You do a great job. It is cheaper, and you don't have to change what you do like every 3 or 4 months. And it's because it's their fault, not yours. It's theirs.
I completely agree. So I want to talk about the article. Obviously, I hope to touch on a couple other things, but I have to start off. I have a bone to pick with you, sir. Yeah, I don't drink that much Kool-Aid anymore as I've gotten older and hardened, and my sports fan soul is like a shriveled little, I don't know, piece of stale fruit. But occasionally I do allow myself to partake, and I was drinking the Giannis Kool-Aid a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then of course I read your article for New York Magazine that came out about a week ago. And you wrote this, we're going to talk about a beautiful piece about how the Knicks are in great state of affairs, the whole thing, and and you end it by saying, and guess what? Not that we need to trade for a star player, but if one should become available, they have the assets to do so. And then you ended with a picture of a custom-made Giannis Antetokounmpo Knicks jersey. And what should happen? What was it? 48 hours later?
Like not even
48 hours later, the Bucks trade for Dame Lillard. It's like, the blame.
I should provide a little context for that because my son, who is about to turn 12 years old, is actually a Bucks fan. Okay. I have never actually, my I don't know about how a lot of people's parents are. My dad, I just rooted for the same teams that he cheered for. And so to me, it's been kind of fun to like troll my son. So that's actually for him. For him. I send him, now he's got a phone. I've been sending him all the Giannis and Knicks jersey photoshops for several months now. So I thought it would be funny for him to come home with the kids version of a Giannis show. And I thought it'd be a funny way to end the column on. And then, yes, 24 hours later. Listen, for the record, as you've written about yourself, I'm not sure the Lillard trade takes that off the table. I think it's more that it maybe pushes it back a year or two, or who knows? Like, who knows what's all going to happen? But certainly, I didn't imagine Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant would be playing together on the Suns right now, or that Chris Paul would be on the Warriors. Like, weird things happen constantly. So I still keep it up in the air. But to me, the premise of that, of doing of ending the column with that jersey, was the idea that, like, for all the smart things the Knicks have done, they are actually still in position, even though they are good now, they're still in position to make something like that happen if it ever becomes available to happen, which I think is a pretty good spot to be in.
I think it's a really good spot to be in. And we'll zoom in and then zoom out, because the thing that you pointed out, and I think you were really eloquent in how you talked about it, is the fact that they have more depth than I think anybody in the league. You actually said they have more really good players than almost any team in the NBA. It's a concept I found myself thinking of a lot this offseason because as you know, I think and overthink and overthink everything. And I'm like, where can not just like a top 4 or a top 5 or even like a top 6, if you look at the Nuggets, right? Or the Celtics now that they've traded for Drew Holiday. Where can a top 9 get you? Where like that, the back end of that, like the play, like never is there going to be a minute where your team is on the floor where you are not having 5 really good basketball players, again, as you wrote, on the court. And it's like, it really has challenged the way that I think about the NBA because I grew up with the same teams that you did. And you mentioned like it's Jordan and the Bulls or Hakeem and the Rockets or whatever it was. And I feel like, does this Knicks team, do you think they really have a chance to like change how we think about how teams can win that are constructed this way?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they'll change. I mean, that Pistons team that Chauncey Billups and Ben Wallace,
that's one.
Probably the best example, but it's really kind of the only example. And depending on where you put Dirk on the list of superstars, I think you pretty much have to have one, right? And so, but the thing that I like about the Knicks is a couple of things. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but before this recent era, the Knicks have been consistently quite bad. And so I
had missed that.
Sorry, check Basketball Reference. It's a whole history of stuff there.
I'm not sure I believe you, but I'll try.
Literally, my piece literally included a picture of Jerome James. Okay, so I
clicked on the link and I knew that was going to be the picture too. Yeah, I was like, he's going to get that picture.
But no, so like I think at a certain level, what I think that Leon Rose and the current managers have figured out is at first you have to raise the floor. And I think that a lot of times we have this notion that like, because you only need 2 superstars or however many you need, that you can just go from 0 to that quickly. And I think, frankly, we've seen the problems with that in the last few years with a lot of teams or sometimes you can think you're going from 35 to 75 and go from 35 to 25, like the Nets. I think the Nets would be a good example. I think it's forgotten now that Nets team was not only good, but actually kind of likable before Durant went over there. I found that team. I would say that team was tough and interesting, and the most anyone's ever liked D'Angelo Russell. So I think that like there's value in that, but I think that people think because you only need 2 or 3 guys, you have this sense that if you just get those guys, everything's fine. And I think that's clearly what plagued the Knicks for years and years and years. Just get 2 or 3 of those guys, and that'll be enough, and we'll figure it out. And I think the smart thing was to understand that it is a matter of generating assets. It's compiling things, whether it's draft picks. Draft picks is one thing, and I think that's obviously a way to do it. I think what they've done that's really smart is also, as I wrote in the piece, have a bunch of very good players. And again, I don't know if you can win a championship with very good players. I think even that Pistons team needed a lot of things to fall exactly right for them to be able to do so.
And Sheed, I know you know as well as I do, talent-wise, he was a top, I mean, you could say he was a top 5 NBA talent at his absolute peak, but at the very least, he had the talent to be the best guy on the floor pretty much any night he played. So, and then when you throw in Billups, like their floor was so high, to refer back to the term you just said, that like they're almost like the exception to the exception that people want to make them out to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that, and so the idea of the Knicks doing that, getting just a bunch of really good players, and it's really funny, the idea that like there's a lot of teams, like think about these teams that like, look at the Celtics. You think the Celtics could like really use a Jericho Sims right now? They would love to have a guy like that guy would shoot up their sort of rotation. The Knicks are trying to find minutes for. And I think that's not a bad place to be. That puts you in a position of strength that I would argue, as I do argue in the piece, having that high floor, which the Knicks clearly needed because they needed something. At a certain level, there was an understanding, and you've written about this as well, the notion that like, okay, before we start worrying about championships, let's just maybe win some games. It's okay to win games. And in a world of like tanking and the idea of like bottoming out, the notion of the like, you know what, let's just be better this year than we were last year, and then be better the next year than we were the year before. It's actually kind of against not just really common NBA thinking, really common sports thinking. I'm actually a fan of the Arizona Cardinals in football. Don't ask me. I don't want to know. And I grew up near St. Louis, and I still stuck with them when they left. And they're terrible. But like when they brought in, they made all these changes for the year, and everyone was just like, wow, they're doing the smart thing. They're full on tanking. They're just bottoming out to help them that year. But for what it's worth, you watch them this year, they're actually a little bit better. They're not a playoff team, but they're a little bit better, and there's a little proof of concept. And I think proof of concept goes a long way in sports. And I think because there's a piece a few years ago written about the notion of like kids don't grow up now wanting to be players. They want to be GMs. They want to be cap managers. And I think at a certain level, because that's become such a high profile position, we get obsessed with being clever and what tricks are they pulling and how do I obtain the assets, and the idea that Daryl Morey and Sam Hinkie are these household names when like how many GMs could you name growing up? Jerry Krause because Jordan hated him. And other than that, like how many GMs did we think of as like a thing? But now it's a big thing. And because of that, why I kind of love that the Knicks have zigged where a lot of other people zag. We're going to just try to win games. We're going to try to win games and we're trying to get better. And while we're doing that, we're not going to make stupid mistakes to act like we have a chance to win the championship right now. Because of that, they've been able to run, I would argue, on these parallel tracks where you've been able to go be a little bit better, occasionally catch a really big break like they did with Jalen Brunson. Like that's a huge break. That was a smart move, but then they got a guy that had a higher ceiling than they realized.
It was a break.
It was a break.
We can admit that it was a break, right? Like and you know how I know that? Because I'm not sure they would have structured his contract the way they did because it's a descending contract. Right. It's going to make it maybe a little trickier to re-sign him, not to get into CBA minutia, but like if they really thought that he was going to be super duper star and that like, I don't know. Longer. Yeah. What I want to go back to is, so you mentioned proof of concept, and then you also mentioned how they've kind of tried to toe the line and zag when everybody else is zigging, or whichever way that analogy goes. It's funny. The second part is funny to me because their approach, I think, amongst a lot of diehard fans has engendered a fair bit of criticism, because I think a lot of fans, maybe because they have been so accustomed to this is how you do things in the NBA, and if you do anything other than this, you are doing it the wrong way and you're wasting everybody's time, or have been critical of the approach where it's just like, hey guys, let's build something here that is just, put off what needs to be put off later, and we'll just be good, as you said. So I find that interesting. The proof of concept I really think is fascinating, because we could look, you mentioned the Brooklyn team, could also look back at the Clippers from that same summer. They had a great year the previous year. And then what's been the common thread maybe with both of those situations? They kind of gave themselves over in different ways. With the Clippers, it's more the take any days off that you want, but gave themselves over to the whims of their stars. And now we see where that got broken and where it seems to be, heading towards with the Clippers. What I think we all have to hope is that if and when the Knicks do make their big trade, which I think they're going to at least try to make, it seems like you share that opinion, that they retain whatever it is that like has made them then and has like gotten you to a place that inspired you to write this column. Because I don't think you write this column just because they're like crossing the T's and dotting the I's. You see something in this team, just like we all see something in this team. There is something about what they are doing that is different, that is special. And I think that's worth noting.
It's fun. And like listen, a lot of this, frankly, I think does come down to Brunson. I think there was a lot of frustration heading into last year. The notion that I'm looking at Randall and being like, cool, all right, I'm excited to have Randall this year is frankly not something that I think a lot of people were thinking heading into last year, even to say the least. And even we're even a little bit after the playoff difficulties against Atlanta. So, I think that what you've seen though is that sort of culture, whether it's Tibbs culture, whether it's Brunson culture, whether it's the culture that Leon Rose has put in there, it is a thing and everybody knows it. Like it's a thing around the league now. It's not something that's going to get blown up in a year. It's not something that like they are looking for people. Listen, I think the Clippers are really a perfect example in this sort of thing. Is like that. And listen, if Kawhi wants to come to the Knicks, I'm willing to give it a shot. But I understand it, right? Like you get the idea, the notion of, and you talk about player empowerment. I think that's a really key way to look about this, because I think we can all agree player empowerment is a long overdue, a positive thing. Generally speaking,
absolutely,
the athletes are the ones who actually make all the money and actually put their bodies on the line, and they're actually like nobody. I don't care about the owners. Never minding the Knicks owner, like owners. I don't care about. I don't understand why people cheer for owners or cheer for GMs. The players are why.
It's very strange.
That's what we're doing. Player empowerment is a good thing. But I do think, as you're clearly seeing with the Harden situation, there's a point where player empowerment can almost not rot, but like there's a fine line between player empowerment and here's a guy that's just never going to be satisfying, blow up a bunch of stuff for a lot of people, which I think is what we've seen pretty consistently from Harden throughout that time. There is a Knicks time where they'd have been like, I know, but man, look at him. Look, we got to do it. And like, and I think the fact that they don't do that, and in fact, the only teams that are really looking at Harden are doing so out of a level of desperation or doing so out of a matter of hopefully the cost gets so low that maybe we feel like we have to, I think speaks to the ultimate kind of limits of player empowerment. Player empowerment works as long as you deliver and are still part of this whole thing. And I think that you're seeing the limitation with Harden. We've seen the limitation with other players. I think that's the thing. I don't think, and for what it's worth, I think you can have player empowerment. Forgive me, but the Knicks, I don't get a sense that the Knicks players don't feel empowered. I don't get a sense that they feel that like we've given up parts of ourselves for this larger concept, like they're pounding the floor at Duke or something. I mean, I think that there's a sense, like I don't think that the players have gotten what they wanted. I don't think there's occasional frustration. Baron might want this. Fine. Nothing against our Frenchie shooter. He's not happy, but no one else. But generally speaking,
but we know why that is.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really blame him for that or Tim.
No, I don't blame him either.
Yeah. And so, but the point is that I think that there is a way to encourage player empowerment and benefit from player empowerment without just giving away the store across the board. And I think the Knicks are, I would argue so far, are running that line pretty well. And I think will benefit them if and when or if the star does eventually come across.
So, yeah, but putting aside that mystery player X for the moment, you also talk about in the piece how the Knicks already do have a star. And as you're just talking about player empowerment, I can't help but think about, well, is it a coincidence that over the last 20 years, the teams that have won the most are the guys with Tim Duncan or the teams with Tim Duncan and Steph Curry? And yes, throw LeBron James in there too. And LeBron James hasn't always been the, I'll say, good soldier that maybe, Steph and Tim at least appear to be from my vantage point outside looking in terms of like, my God, if you could build your franchise around anybody, like, who could you imagine better than Steph Curry and Tim Duncan? LeBron, I think the talent was just so overwhelming that at times he won, but there were times where you looked at the way he used his empowerment to maybe force his teams or put his teams in a certain position. I don't, was that always effective? So then you look at a guy like Jalen Brunson. Is he as talented as Steph Curry or Tim Duncan? No, he's not as talented as those guys, but he's like, man, I'm like giddy thinking about getting to watch this guy this year. I haven't felt this way about a player. I felt like since I was a teenager. It's wild. And that I don't know what that says about him. I think it has to do with his whole, like it's an underdog story and the whole thing and just his attitude. I love this guy. I thought you hit the nail on the head with him.
Yeah, listen, and for the record, I would defend, before we get into our Brunson Love Fest, which I'm eager to be a part of, I would defend LeBron a little. I guarantee all three of the teams that he's played for have all three of those teams he's played for, whether he left or not, they're happy that that's
absolutely
better off for having LeBron.
100%.
So
yes.
I'm sure Cleveland would have loved to have him play for them the entire time, but also look where Cleveland was when he left. You take a step back from it, and they had all sorts of issues. They're actually not entirely dissimilar from where Milwaukee was before the Lillard trade, right? Like, absolutely. I think if you actually could do that comparison, the difference was the Bucks went out and said, "Okay, what do you want, and what can we get you?" And the Cavs didn't do that. And I'm not, maybe that would have made a difference or maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. But I think it's unfair to look at LeBron and say, he's just only out for himself, doesn't care about a larger thing. I know that's not what you're saying. I know that's not what you're saying. But
he wants to win, I think, I actually think the biggest thing that I've changed in my own mind as an NBA fan over the years is I used to project my own assumptions because of LeBron's personality onto what he cared about and what he didn't care about. And now over the last few years, the more I pay attention, the more I just listen to him and read the stuff he says. I think he actually cares about winning as much as anybody since Jordan. Because like you don't put in the time and the work. I do think there was a little bit of Phil Jackson going on with some of the ways that he would try to, be the puppeteer, which again,
poorly, by the way, they had the reason Lakers are good now is they had to fix all the stuff that LeBron did a year ago with Westbrook and everything. So I don't disagree.
But that's the thing. Yeah.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Okay, Brunson love. So,
Brunson love, yes.
And for me, and I think listen, I love Brunson too. I also think part of the Brunson love, in addition to who he is there is something about his game that I think can't help but make Knicks fans feel nostalgic too for really the most fun era of the Knicks time in our lifetimes anyway.
In our lifetime, yes.
Yeah, and I think that, I know I wasn't around for the 70s team, so I can't speak to that. But certainly, I mean, when you think of the Knicks, that's the one that everybody loves the most. And Brunson plays like that. And plays like that as much as you can in today's game, which I think is actually one of the things that's most so fun about Brunson, is he actually in an age where a lot of that old school stuff frankly, the NBA's tried to get rid of a lot of it and that kind of like slow it down and that, and like he still is able to integrate that into the game. It's not like his peripheral numbers are bad. Right, like it's not like the smart that you look at the second spectrum and all of a sudden all of his he looks bad. He plays it like it shows up. It shows
everything bears out, yeah.
But like he doesn't play like an inefficient '90s ISO ball star. He plays within the run of the game. But that toughness is something that I think is. It's irresistible. And it's funny because, I wrote a piece a long time ago about what I interviewed Spike Lee, and Spike Lee told me the loudest he had ever seen the Garden was during Linsanity. He said he'd been there throughout the 90s. The loudest he'd ever heard was Linsanity. And I asked him why he thought that was. And he told me it's because he feels homegrown. He wasn't so, and even though Brunson what they did sign Brunson, there's something about a guy who had these expectations and then raised his game in front of the New York fans in a sensibility that feels close to the fan zone. The Linsanity thing was like, Carmelo was great. Carmelo was better than Jeremy Lin. Like Carmelo was clearly
to be clear, yes,
but like to be as clear as possible. But Carmelo felt like this is what the Knicks do. They bring in the guy from outside, and this one, it's actually paid off, and not maybe as much as we ultimately wanted him to, but clearly there were a lot worse investments than Carmelo Anthony. But it wasn't as exciting because you're like Carmelo was you're here, pal. Let's see if you're worth all this stuff that we That was
exactly the attitude. We all had it.
And I think that is a hard. In that case, you have to win a title because that so much is brought in. Jeremy Lin was someone like, wait, this guy came out of nowhere. And he's ours. And almost we appreciated him better than other people. I think Brunson benefits from that as well, even though he did come from Dallas. The idea was Dallas they didn't want to keep him. They didn't want to make the offer they wanted to. The Knicks, he felt like part of the family immediately. And then he has exceeded expectations since he got there. That's something you don't get a lot with the Knicks. The Knicks have so much hype that comes in and so much discussion and so much, you better be the guy. For Brunson to come in with reasonable to medium expectations and become the player he has, I think it's something Knicks fans don't get a lot. It makes it that much more exciting.
You just said a word, and I'm not sure if you meant to say it or not, but I'm going to go back to it. Part of the family. Yeah. And like, we're sitting here, we're talking about all the stuff that the Knicks have built, and we'd be remiss not to at least mention the guy he was behind the scenes of the NBA for 20 years, and now he's behind the scenes of the Knicks, World Wide Wes, where there's been reporting that, documents that he sees this as a big family, and that's how he has always intended to construct a basketball team. And like, again, going back to the player empowerment stuff, if like players really do feel like, the Leon Rose and Worldwide Wes and Tom Thibodeau, Tibbs is everybody's boss, but he's in his own category because he's Tibbs. But like, like the guys that is signing my checks, they're not my boss. Like there is real like shared, intentionality here behind what we're doing. And we're kind of all in this together, which is like, I don't know. Is that really happening? I don't know. Does it happen around the NBA? I don't know. But it does seem like they have something going here where, again, like you said, Brunson now is here, part of the family. To me, I'm interested to see if they can keep that going, because what do families do? Families fight sometimes. And like, they've kept it afloat though so far. I'm hopeful. I'm being naively optimistic. What can I say?
I mean, I'll put it this way. It's impossible to imagine. Like we just saw this with Lillard's agent with, what's his name from Portland? The idea.
Goodwin and the GM, Joe Cronin. Yeah.
Cronin. Yes. Where basically he's, and listen, we can argue whether or not who's right or who's wrong. I think that's, Zach Lowe just had a good discussion on this podcast about this, and we can have that argument, but clearly it's adversarial. We can talk about Harden all we want, but like, it's impossible to imagine a player going to China or anywhere really and saying, I will never play for Leon Rose because that guy's a liar. It's just, it's impossible to imagine that. And that's not nothing, particularly in an age where players and like there are like fair or not, there's a perception that there are players and there are like the stat guys or the Harvard guy. We see this in baseball as well. The guys that actually run everything are not baseball guys, are not basketball guys, are not part of the family. And I think that I think Morey, who I think is smart, has made some good decisions. And taking James Harden's side on anything is not something I feel particularly comfortable with. But you can see how Harden would be like this. Who is this guy? Who is this guy? This guy's got nothing to do with what I do in the court. This guy's got nothing to do with my life. And now he's trying to dictate my decisions to me. The Knicks don't have that situation. You're right. If it comes down, it's easy for me to say that now, but if like Embiid comes up and RJ Barrett, member of the family, RJ Barrett, becomes someone that I need to trade for it, buy RJ. Like at a certain level, I think that inevitably those decisions have to be made, but I think you want to make them from this position. The idea where there's good faith and there's good understanding. No one is pressuring someone to get out. No one, I think everyone's pretty straightforward about things, and it does feel like that. But it really comes down to that ultimate question that you've talked about and we've talked about in this. They have made the bet. Eventually a star is going to break loose. Eventually there's going to be one. And for what it's worth, the NBA has put together a whole bunch of provisions to make that as difficult as possible. It's not as easy as it was before. It's not as simple as it was before. We've already been waiting a few years for it. I think they might the time I wanted Mitchell, and then when they didn't get him, I have to say I had enough faith. I was like, I trust him. We'll see how this goes. And ultimately, I mean, beating the Cavs in the first round of the series with Mitchell is not a terrible way to kind of vindicate that. You feel smart about that, keeping that powder dry. The question is, I think you wrote about this today too, the idea you have like a year, right? Like basically by next offseason, maybe a year.
Not a hard. Yeah. It's a deadline that's in it's in pencil, but it's thickly drawn pencil, right. Given the way the CBA
it's not Giannis, it's Embiid. If it's not Embiid, it's Luka. Like you keep it. You think eventually that person's going to come up, but for what it's worth, let's just say they never do. Let's just say they never do, and the Knicks have been building up all this time to get a star that never shakes loose, and it never happens. You know what? I will still take what's happened over the last few years and what I think is going to happen this year and next year over then get a higher draft pick. Hopefully one of them, we're going to talk these guys. And I hear Leon's making the pitch. Like I still remember writing for New York Magazine, the stories of Donnie Walsh showing up in the wheelchair. And,
the neck brace was that him in the neck brace?
Whatever. Yeah. And
it was some malady. I don't.
Yeah. To get LeBron and all the ugliness and all the weirdness and all the desperation that came with that and all the things you had to talk yourself into. I think I regularly talk myself into happy things involving with the Knicks, but it's more fun to talk yourself into happy things happening with the Knicks when you are watching a good, likable team play basketball. Does it mean I'd love to have Embiid? I'd love to have Luka. I'd love to have Giannis. Of course I would. Who would not want to have those players? And I think the Knicks have positioned themselves well to give themselves an opportunity. But also while that's happening, they have a good team that's fun to watch. And that, to me, was the point of the column, is the idea that you actually have both rails working at the same time in a way that's incredibly difficult to find in the NBA.
And my biggest challenge for this season will be, I don't know if this is an existential crisis, but like being able to always live in the moment, and God willing they're a good team, and God willing they win something close to 50 games, and it is what we think it is going to be, and not be worrying about did Philadelphia win or lose tonight, like what's going on over there, something like that. That's my challenge, because like you said, this team has been bad at times, many times over the last 20 years, and like I've said this a lot last year, and over maybe even 3 years ago, the first Tibbs year, like, I think Knicks fans do deserve this after everything that we've been through. So, like, I completely agree with you. It's very well said. It's something that I need to hear. Maybe some other people need to hear it as well. Like, let's enjoy the team that we have. I want to hit on a couple of the things with you because I have you, and I want to pick your brain about this stuff. So it's funny, you opened the lead to the column was about how the NBA has become 10 years ago, it started to become, and it is now like fully in the thick of becoming a sport where the interest is driven by the offseason and by the trade rumors and all these sorts of things. Whereas, the basketball, the stuff we're supposed to care about has actually become secondary. And I was thinking about the fact that, like, obviously you might be the most passionate baseball fan I know. You are up there. Like, when I read you in your newsletter and you write about, your beloved Cardinals, it hits a spot deep down. And I'm thinking about what's happened to these two sports, the NBA and Major League Baseball, and I just kind of wanted to ask you a very open-ended question. Like, do you think the off-season stuff with the NBA, like all the stuff that you're talking about, it drives interest? Do you think that's why the NBA is kind of where it is, and Major League Baseball is kind of? I don't want to say anything too harsh because, like, there are still huge baseball fans, but I feel like the sport has changed the place. Like, where do you think that comes from?
I would caution against the notion that like, baseball's had a really good year. That was my next New York Magazine column after this one, was about how baseball has actually had a pretty terrific year. And I would argue that baseball, while I would say the major difference between the sports, because if you look at the TV ratings, they're not that different.
Yes, that's true.
They're really
that's
not
very
that
true.
different. And I think a lot of it comes from, frankly, juice. Like, at a certain level, like, the NBA feels like the NBA feels more active and more relevant and more young than baseball is. And the demographics clearly show that. But I would argue in a macro sense that, like, numbers wise, and for the record, like, ask people in Latin America, they're watching more baseball than they're watching the NBA.
Also true.
So, I think that, like, in a macro sense, I don't know if it's as the NFL's eaten both of our lunches. I don't think there's any.
Well, that goes without saying.
But I think that, like, at a certain level, I think the disparity is not as vast as people think. But I do think that the intrigue becomes, listen, the NBA is so fun to speculate about. And I think that is the difference. Is baseball is fun. Like, both these sports are fun to watch and fun to follow and fun to be part of. But baseball at a certain level settles into its groove. At a certain point, baseball season is a long season. There's 162 games. There's a brief free agent frenzy for, and there have been talk that people have. It's funny. What people often talk about, the most fun baseball off season ever was after the lockout got settled, because all of a sudden there was a frenzy of moves for like 3 weeks, like in the NBA. It was like a fun thing for like a week and a half. Everything just went nuts, and that was really enjoyable. Even the baseball off season usually spreads out a little bit, frankly. Kind of like this NBA offseason, where it felt like we were going to get all, and then it just lingered and lingered and lingered and lingered. And so I think that, like, the NBA, because there are fewer players, I think that has a big thing to do with it. Yeah, inevitably, personalities are going to be a bigger deal in the NBA than they are in baseball, or even really in the NFL, because at the fundamental level, there are fewer players. There are fewer players who matter. Like, there are fewer players who make huge differences. And frankly, they're not. They are, frankly, they're running around in their pajamas for us. Like, we can see them so clearly, right? Like, their personalities show in a way, like, in baseball, they're wearing hats. In football, they're wearing helmets. In hockey, they're wearing, like, they're
body armor.
Like, like, seriously, they're all in Kevlar at a certain point. But, like, to me, one of the reasons the NBA is so appealing is the idea of those personalities and of those. Like, I joke about James Harden, but good Lord, like, I love baseball. And I know baseball so well. I know so much about James Harden's personality, much more than I'd even really care to know. But you can't help it, because when you follow the sport, he becomes a compelling figure. What's he going to do now? You can make fun of him a little bit for decisions that he's made, for how a good agent would have made a big difference for him in a lot of ways. But, like, all this stuff I don't know who the hell Mike Trout's agent is. I have no idea who Mike Trout's agent is. He's been signed for 12 years. I just have to watch him play baseball. And I think that, like, that is a difference. I don't know if it leads I don't think it hurts the game. So there's an argument that some people have made that like all the off court stuff and all that intrigue somehow makes the game less interesting. I think if you love the game, you love the game.
You love the game, yeah.
And I don't think there's any danger of that. I think that while the off court stuff is different than the game, I don't know if it necessarily distracts from the game, but I do think that the reason the NBA feels like it has more juice, and one of the main reasons for it, I think there's clear demographic reasons as well. But I think one of the main reasons that the NBA has juice is the NBA is just really fun to talk about. It's fun to listen to your podcast or to listen to Zach. Like Zach Lowe's podcast, it's like the enthusiasm that Zach has for like the eighth guy on the Magic is incredible.
But it's genuine.
And it's incredible. Exactly. And you can obsess over it in that way. Baseball, you can do it, but it's quirkier. And you can't follow everything all the time because a bunch of the games don't matter. A bunch of the games don't make a difference. You watch a baseball game to settle in and have a conversation with your friend. You watch an NBA game to watch stuff happen. And I think because of that, there's a natural obsession over these players in a way that you don't necessarily in baseball and really even in the NFL.
That was great to listen to. It's going to make me think even more because it almost strikes me that it's not anything that the NBA has done, whether it was David Stern or now Adam Silver to they've made decisions here or there that I'm sure have helped, but this is, as the world has gone more online and as attention spans have gone down and as just more people want to, take part in the conversation. I do think the fact that, like you just said it, anybody could talk about the NBA. Right? You don't have to whereas baseball
you don't even need to know anything about basketball.
No, you don't. No, but baseball, it's funny because I was a big baseball fan for most of my life, and just doing this now the last few years, as I don't have to tell you, I don't have the hours in the day anymore, so I've kind of fallen out of it. And Andrew, who's producing this podcast, and some of my buddies that were on a text chain together, they're still into baseball, and they'll talk about it in our text thread sometimes, and I'll feel I can't even chime in, and I don't know. I mean, maybe that says something about me. I don't know, but the NBA does really feel like something very unique, and that
it's easier. It's also easier to keep track of. To be entirely honest,
it is easier. It
is easier to keep track of. I would argue it's easier to keep track of. I got to tell you, you talk about the baseball that way. I've kind of gotten that way with the NFL. I can't keep track of the NFL. There's just so
it's
many.
Hard.
It's
Same
really
thing.
hard. And to be fair, that's actually kind of helped my NFL fandom because now I'm just like, hey, is there a game on? Let's watch a game. And I'm not doing what I'm doing with the NBA or with baseball. I'm just like, yep, there's a game on. I know to cheer against Aaron Rodgers. Sorry, but other than that, and I know, and Patrick Mahomes seems like a pretty nice guy. And
he does seem like a nice guy. Yeah.
But other than and I hear Taylor Swift has somehow gotten involved with this. But
she has gotten involved. Even I know that. I'm very proud of myself.
But at a certain level, like the NFL, I the NFL is a game that now I think is for casual fans. That's how it's gotten so big. There's no way the world could be walking around obsessed with the NFL the way 100%. That people are obsessed about NBA or baseball, or not that many people would watch the NFL. The NFL is a casual sport, and that's fine. I'm a casual NFL fan. It doesn't decrease my enjoyment of it. I would argue one thing that I think would help you is to don't worry about being able to be involved in every single Mets conversation or every single thing. Just at a certain level, just know the big storylines. It's fine. I would argue that's a great thing for baseball. I think something that baseball needs to work on a little bit is baseball's not just for people who understand everything about it in the same way that the NBA isn't for it doesn't have to be for everyone that understands everything about it. Baseball, like all sports, as I get older, when I was 23 years old, I knew every player on every team in all of the sports. And I was obsessed over I was in every fantasy league. As I've gotten older, you get kids, you can't help but you end up writing all these books. You end up having to compartmentalize your time. At a certain level, you obsess over what you obsess over, but the sport will still be there for you either way. And I think if you ever want to work your way back to baseball, don't worry you do not have to care about baseball the way that you care about the Knicks. My God, you'll blow a gasket. But
listen, man, there are not enough hours.
but you can be a casual observer of it and find just as much.
I think I will at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully the Mets will be a little bit better next year because that is.
The Mets? Never mind. Do nothing with it. Stay the hell away. Save yourself.
My wife would divorce me if I ever rooted for another baseball team. No, wise words. The last thing I'll say, because you just brought it up, is like the notion of being a casual fan versus a diehard fan. That is something I think about a lot, because every day I sit down to write this newsletter, and I do periodically catch myself like, who am I writing? Like, not who am I writing this for? I know who I'm writing for, but like, will this be accessible? Equally accessible, at least somewhat equally accessible to someone, whether they are.
I pay you every month. I pay you every month, and I like at a certain level, or every year, or however long I do. I don't know what plan I'm on, but I'm giving you money. And
thank you, both.
At a certain level, I'm there because I'm obsessed with the Knicks. Like, that's why I'm there. And I feel like this is a problem that's happened with media the last few years. I think the Taylor Swift thing is actually a really good example of this. The Deion Sanders thing is also a good example of this. There's this idea that like, wait, we need the widest possible audience. Let's go after people who are not paying any attention at all. We used to call this drive-by traffic back in the old Deadspin days. The idea that like I could write Britney Spears pantsless in every headline and have the most successful site on the internet, but like people would be like, this site sucks.
Tomorrow's newsletter headline.
Yeah, and like no one would want it, right? And so I think at a certain level, I think what I've grown to really appreciate about sports is that you can obsess as much you want about it, or you can not obsess over, but like make it what you want. I love The Athletic. I love the work they're doing over there. I think as they've gotten rid of some beat reporters, I think they've made a switch into Deion Sanders, Taylor Swift land. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders is awesome. Nothing wrong with Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is awesome. But like, Wonderful. If you're a sports fan, you do want to know about the stuff that actually matters in sports, in addition to those stuff. And I think increasingly the hardcore fan, in the name of traffic and larger things, is why what you do is so important. Because at a certain level, a lot of these reporters are all getting people going, traffic numbers. They got editors pushing traffic on them all the time. You can actually write obsessive stuff for obsessive Knicks fan and be making them very happy.
The challenge of compartmentalization versus shit, I have to make a living. I'm very interested in this whole thing, and we'll have a conversation every few years and check in on like, where are we at now? Like what's coming next? Because I, for one, just like I try not to obsess over it, but it's hard because
the only thing I worry about, as long as people like sports, we're going to be fine. As long as people like sports, we're all going to just people will keep making sports stuff. So as long as that happens, I think we'll be okay.
That is important. Leitch, you are, you are a legend, a living legend, with all that you have done and accomplished and all that you continue to do. I mean, truly, there are days where I'm like, man, this is really hard when I'm trying to go about my business here and make this thing happen. And I look at what you have done over the years, and knowing that you're a Knicks fan helps, but just like I get your newsletter and read that every week. It's just, so thank you on behalf of any other, content creator or media person who, is looking for inspiration occasionally. But yeah, man, it's an honor and a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Keep up the great work, man. And of course, go Knicks.